I'm Jason, and I'm turning 28 this year, working a 9-to-5 job. To many, it seems that I've had my fair share of hardships. My parents passed away from illness when I was just a kid. My dad passed first. I think my mom was so overwhelmed with grief that she fell. It felt as though she followed him. Lost without my parents, I was taken in by relatives. I don't remember being mistreated by them. I think they tried their best to care for me. But I never truly felt like I was a part of the family. My cousins were kind, but I always felt out of place. I've always wanted to move out and be independent. I've felt this way since middle school. While many suggested I go to college, I wanted to start working. My uncle respected my wishes. So, right after high school, I got a job and started living in the company's dorms. I work at a big corporation in my hometown. The person who hired me was the previous CEO. Now, his son has taken over as the CEO. The former CEO treated me like his son, and the current CEO treats me like a younger brother. I've faced many challenges, but now, with supportive colleagues, I live a peaceful life. But recently, there's been a change in my life. A new supervisor joined the company in April. He's from a top university and always flaunts his education. I became his main target. At first, this new supervisor was polite to me, but during his welcome party, upon discovering I only had a high school diploma, he changed his attitude completely. I realized then what it means to see someone's true colors. From that day on, every day has been hell. He started calling me high school grad. I just wanted him to call me by my name, but he just laughed it off. Complaining to higher-ups was futile since the vice president had specially recruited him, and there was no one to reprimand him. My colleagues felt sorry for me but were too hesitant to go against the boss. I distanced myself from everyone, so they wouldn't feel burdened. But I'm only human. Putting up with his attitude and sarcasm every day was, to be honest, hard. Today, from the morning, he kept calling out high school grad and reprimanded me non-stop for a mistake that wasn't mine. He obviously knows it wasn't my fault. If it was truly my mistake, a caution wouldn't have been enough. His lecture ended just before lunch. Probably he wrapped it up to eat. I was on the verge of losing it. To cool down, I'd often go to the backyard of the office. There's a seemingly random yet well-maintained flower bed there that calms me. Every time I'm upset, I sit by the flower bed and take deep breaths. This spot was secretly introduced to me by the previous CEO when I just joined the company. Take deep breaths here to cope with life's challenges, he had said. But today, I was so irritated, I almost forgot his advice. I'd never do something like this, but today, the peaceful flowers swaying in the wind angered me. In a fit of rage, I kicked the flowers, and light purple petals scattered everywhere. Instead of feeling relieved, guilt weighed heavily on me. With a heavy heart, I let out a deep sigh. How terrible! Why would you do such a thing? Suddenly, a frail voice said that, and I turned to look behind me. There stood a girl in a black dress. She was pointing at the flowers I had scattered, her lips quivering. Her pale skin, which looked like it seldom saw sunlight, looked like a reminiscent of a doll. "Did those flowers do something to you?" she continued, and I was momentarily caught off guard. It seemed I had unintentionally been staring at her. Of course, what she said made sense, and it was clearly me who was in the wrong. But today, of all days, I just couldn't bring myself to admit my mistake. "Aren't you an outsider? Don't just barge into the company grounds," I snapped at her, showing my irritation. The girl flinched at my voice. Seeing her tremble slightly reminded me of the flowers I had kicked around, causing a twinge of guilt. "I'm sorry," she muttered, bowing her head. Her slightly silvery long hair shimmered as it caught the sunlight. But you shouldn't have done that either. Did something sad happen to you? As she said this and began approaching me, I unconsciously took a step back. A moment ago, she seemed so timid, but now she was boldly moving closer. Next time, instead of taking it out on flowers, have this. She tried to push something into my mouth. Something hard was pressed against my lips. A candy with a minty flavor rolled into my mouth. As I stood there in surprise, she offered me a small can. Somehow compelled, I took it from her. The contents of the can rattled as I held it. Please cheer up with this. With that, she turned on her heel and dashed towards the back gate. She must have seen the flower bed from somewhere and entered the premises. The glimpse of her pale skin, visible from beneath her dress when she turned, stayed on my mind throughout the afternoon's work. The small can in my pocket rattled. On that day which I had that mint candy shoved into my mouth, I happened to see her again on the way back home. She was on the opposite sidewalk, stopped by a man in a car, seemingly asking her something. It looked like he was asking for directions. Unaware or perhaps ignoring his intrusive closeness, she looked into her cell phone to provide guidance to him. From where I stood, I could clearly see the man's sly, unsettling grin, and it made my blood boil. I jumped over the guardrail to cross to the other side. And then, I positioned myself between her and the man. Sorry, did I keep you waiting? Who is this guy? I pretended to be her boyfriend as I asked her. She looked taken aback by my sudden appearance. The man clicked his tongue in annoyance. What? Where do you want to go? I can explain. With a friendly smile directed at the man, he mumbled something like I'm fine, and hurriedly got into his car. He drove away as if escaping. Watching his retreating car, I was pondering the situation when I felt light punches on my back. Why did you lie? I can give directions too. She seemed to feel belittled, her face turning a deep shade of red in apparent anger. Her obliviousness to the danger she was in somewhat angered me. You were about to be dragged off into some remote area by that guy. Did you see his face? That creepy way he laughed. As I said this, grabbing her slender wrist, she shot me a defiant look. That man was a gentleman. Maybe you're just mistaken. By the way, my name is Catherine. Even elementary school kids these days are taught at school to ignore strangers if they talk to them. I don't know if she's some sheltered girl from somewhere, but I'm racking my brain trying to figure out how to explain things to her. As I was stumbling over my words, the girl who introduced herself as Catherine smirked, looking rather puffed up. She probably thought she had me beat in the argument. Seeing that expression on her face, I felt frustrated. Fine, got it. I won't offer any more help from now on. There'll come a time when you'll realize I was right. With those parting words, I turned my back on Catherine. I left without looking back. That was the plan, at least. Suddenly, I heard the screech of a car coming to an abrupt stop behind me. A bad feeling crept over me, so I stopped and looked back. Sure enough, it was the same situation unfolding all over again. I instinctively dropped to my knees, holding my head in my hands. This time, it was a group of 3 young men. One of them was talking to Catherine, and while she was distracted, another snuck up behind her. The last one stayed in the car, seemingly waiting for the right moment to open the door. My gut told me this was seriously bad news. Catherine was cheerfully giving the guy directions. In an age where everyone uses GPS, I wish people would quickly realize how odd it is for someone to ask a pedestrian for directions. Catherine, what are you doing? Come over here now. I yelled her name loudly. She looked over, startled, with a surprised look on her face. The men saw me and muttered something like, "She's got a boyfriend," before quickly getting in their car and driving off. By the time I got to Catherine, the car was long gone. She stood there with a blank face. How can someone who's lost drive off so quickly? She wondered aloud. All I could muster was a, who knows? If I let her go home alone now, she might really never make it back. More than anger or disbelief, I started to feel genuinely concerned. Where do you live? I'll walk you home. When I said that while scratching my head in frustration, Catherine puffed out her cheeks, replying, I'm fine. I'm not a child. I can walk home by myself. Saying that, she turned her face away from me in a huff and began walking. Of course, I'm under no obligation to escort her. But if something were to happen to her and I saw her photo on the morning news, I'd regret it for the rest of my life. Okay, I get it. I'm heading the same way, so just ignore me, I told her, following a short distance behind her. At first, she seemed wary of me trailing her, but after a while, she began initiating conversation. Still walking ahead, she asked, What's your name, and how old are you? I replied, but she just responded with a casual I see. But I have noticed. I saw that her steps had become lighter, and she seemed happier as we walked. After walking side by side for a bit, Catherine suddenly stopped in front of an event bulletin board. There were posters advertising public events. One of them had caught her eye. She was looking at a poster for an event at the County Botanical Garden called Night at the Botanical Gardens. The nighttime garden would be illuminated and feature pop-up outdoor libraries, markets, and bars. Visitors would be given lanterns with LED candles that glow. Catherine gazed at the poster with sparkling eyes. Do you want to go? I asked nonchalantly. She nodded slightly. Her profile looked a bit sad. I've been told I shouldn't go out at night. She said that, while smiling as if she had gave up. Then she fascinated me with her own version of the nighttime botanical garden all the way to her house. The nighttime botanical garden she described sounded as magical as a fairy tale, utterly charming and delightful to hear about. I was so engulfed in her whimsical story until we were standing in front of her home's gate, where she turned around and said, We're here, and smiled. Thank you for walking me home, she said. With the same cheerfulness she showed during the day, Catherine gave a quick little bow. Her home had a grand entrance, so big that you couldn't see the front door from the gate. She truly seemed like a genuine young lady of high standing. Do you want to go together to the nighttime botanical garden? That just slipped out of my mouth. Catherine looked up at me, her face lighting up as if she was caught off guard. If we sneak out, no one will know, it'll be fine. With a mischievous grin, I eased her, and Catherine laughed in response. We then made a promise by doing a pinky swear. We decided to go on the last day of the nighttime botanical garden. And just like that, we shared a secret between us. Meeting Catherine was like a breath of fresh air for me. The next morning, the manager was on my case again, but I noticed I wasn't as irritated as before. Whenever I thought of Catherine's face and the cool taste of mint, I felt calmer. No matter how calm I seemed, the manager grew more and more infuriated with me. In the end, he banged hard on my desk. As he walked away, I could hear him grumbling, that high school graduate. It looked rather comical. From the recent office gossip, it seems that he doesn't like colleagues come to me for work advice instead of going to him. Well, I've been with this company since I graduated from high school. I'm what you'd call a veteran here. Probably they find me more reliable than the new manager. Bragging about educational backgrounds tends to fade among adults. I began to feel a little sorry for the manager who's still clinging to that. A few days later, right after work, I headed to my apartment, changed into casual wear, and went to pick up Catherine. It was that time when the sun is just about to set. I called out to her from below the window of her room she had pointed out to me, just beyond the fence. Almost immediately, as if she had been waiting, her window opened. Catherine, spotting me, flashed a smile as bright as a flower and waved. She first tossed a small bag to me from her balcony. After that, Catherine leaned out from her balcony and deftly jumped onto a nearby cherry tree. She then skillfully made her way down to the top of the fence. When I spread out my arms, she jumped in with a joyful look. She had absolute trust that I'd catch her. It made me happy to know that. Gently, I held her with both arms and softly set her down on the ground. "It's like I'm a princess," she said. She gave me an innocent smile, making me blush. With a teasing tone, I said, "Let's go." Catherine cheerfully replied, "Okay," and followed behind me. The nighttime botanical garden was quite eventful, especially since it was the last day. "There's supposed to be a live jazz band playing tonight." Catherine's eyes sparkled as she looks around the lit-up garden. When I tried to light the way with a lantern, she insisted on holding it herself. With little Catherine illuminating our path, we slowly strolled through the garden together. When our legs grew tired, we borrowed a book from the outdoor library set up on the lawn, and under the lantern's light, we leaned in close to look at photo albums of botanical gardens from all over the world. We got thirsty, so I bought some sangria and we toasted. Munching on small square sandwiches, we chatted about various things. I think the alcohol made me a bit loose-lipped. I found myself sharing personal stories with her, stories I wouldn't usually tell. About how both my parents passed away one after the other, and how I then grew up in a relative's home. About how eager I was to be on my own, and how I pushed my boundaries with my uncle. Though I'd never shared this with anyone, somehow I could open up to Catherine. Well, it's a kind of story you hear everywhere. I concluded my personal tale with those words. Somewhere along the line, I felt embarrassed and couldn't look into Catherine's eyes. I was startled to notice silent tears rolling down her cheeks. She was crying silently, without making a sound. "What's wrong? Stomach hurting?" She shook her head in response to my hurried query. "I'm sorry. I know you wouldn't want pity, and it's rude for me to feel bad for you, but I can't stop crying." I realized I couldn't do anything but surrender to the moment. Regardless of how I might resist, it would be futile. I'm drawn to Catherine. She's so naive and pure, holding on to secrets unknown to me. I don't mind. I'm not at all bothered if you feel sorry for me," I sincerely said. From that day on, Catherine and I became much closer. My personal life was great, but at work, my supervisor continued to give me a hard time as always. Lately, he's been nitpicking, looking for any mistakes I might make. If he can't find one, he tries to pin someone else's mistakes on me. Whenever he does that, he'd always say, "You are fired." Of course, it's impossible for him to fire me just on his own whim. Even a child would know it's just an empty threat. If I had remained calm, if I had held back, things wouldn't have escalated. That day, the supervisor was more persistent than ever. He kept probing, asking why I didn't go to college and digging into my personal life. "So, after your parents passed away, you got shuffled around relatives' homes. The typical sob story. Your parents probably lacked the will to live. Losers, I guess." He must have read my background. When I remained silent, he continued to mock my parents and relatives. "If it weren't for the insurance money, they wouldn't have been able to do anything for you." I'd held back for so long, but this was the last straw. Before I realized it, my smirking supervisor was on the ground. Clutching his cheek, it seems I had struck him. "Hitting your boss. Typical behavior for a high school grad, like an undisciplined stray dog." That's when I realized. The supervisor was provoking me by insulting my parents, just to get a reaction out of me. I had fallen right into his trap. I was suspended and confined to my dorm room until they decided on further action. I don't regret what I did, I wish I could have counted with words, but my overwhelming anger pushed me to act. If it turned out that I was the only one getting suspended, I wish I'd made a bigger scene. That's my only regret. Today is the third day of my suspension. On a weekday afternoon, the bachelor dorm is eerily quiet. After being comforted with a "you made a mess" by the cafeteria lady while eating lunch, I returned to my room to find my window pane making a sharp noise. When I listened closely, I then heard an even louder thump. I quickly opened the window, and right below, I saw Catherine, about to throw a fist-sized rock at my window. "Hold on, hold on, hold on, that's crazy." I was more amused than shocked. She said she had been throwing increasingly larger rocks because I didn't notice the smaller ones. "I heard you got suspended, and I got worried." Why? Who told you? How did Catherine know about my suspension?" Catherine just said, "It's a secret," and smiled. Afterwards, I was able to return to work, but I couldn't get back to my original department. I was moved to a position with nothing but menial tasks, seemingly being edged towards quitting on my own. During this time, the CEO was on an extended business trip abroad, and all decisions were being made by the vice president, which wasn't ideal. The vice president was basically a puppet to the supervisor, easily manipulated. I was determined to stay, at least until the CEO returned. About 6 months after my transfer, something wonderful happened in my personal life. Catherine accepted my marriage proposal. I know it might seem too soon, but I wanted a family of my own. I couldn't imagine anyone but Catherine by my side. I just wanted to tell her that as soon as possible. "I want to give you something precious." This was her response to my proposal. She took off the locket pendant she always wore. She gently opened the intricately designed pendant top with her delicate fingers to show me its contents. Upon seeing what was inside, I couldn't help but exclaim, "Well, it held another one of Catherine's secrets." Look, it's my father, the secret evidence. The secret Catherine had been hiding for so long was now shared with me, and I couldn't contain the overwhelming love I felt for her. It's probably something she wouldn't want anyone to know. Inside, there was a picture of the former CEO who had treated me like his own son. From this, I could infer that Catherine had a complicated relationship with him, her father. Things moved quickly, and a wedding date was set. When I handed out invitations to my co-workers, everyone congratulated me. Of course, I also gave an invite to the supervisor. He accepted it with an arrogant demeanor and casually tossed it onto a pile of documents. From what I've heard, he's planning to attend, just to save face in front of the others. This news was a relief for me, because his attendance was a crucial part of a plan Catherine and I had plotted. If he didn't show up, our plan wouldn't kick off. I quietly looked forward to the surprise we had in store for the wedding day. On the day of the wedding, as expected, the supervisor's behavior was beyond rude. Even though he was scheduled to attend the church ceremony, he started drinking beer early on and got completely drunk. In that state, he stumbled into the bridal suite and, in his typical manner, began to loudly mock me. "Look at you, getting married so young even though you only finished high school. Did something happen? Did she get pregnant? Is she also just a high school graduate? I bet she's just another pretty face with no brains, right?" He loudly repeated such disgraceful remarks. I was desperate to calm down my cousin and uncle, who rushed over in anger. The supervisor, seeing this, only became more elated. He began to shift his insults and hurtful words from me to Catherine. "What do you see in a high school graduate? Oh, are you the one bringing home the bacon? Right, any girl will do if there's money involved," he said, peering into Catherine's face with a vulgar laugh. "The nerve you have is astounding. How dare you speak to my sister that way?" An unexpected voice thundered. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly with the sudden appearance of the CEO. The supervisor was dumbstruck, his mouth agape. Catherine looked up to the CEO and softly called him Big Brother. As it turns out, the CEO and Catherine are half-siblings. The CEO is the child of a previous marriage, while Catherine seems to be a child he had out of wedlock. The former CEO deeply loved Catherine's mother and reportedly neglected his own wife, who he had been in a somewhat arranged marriage with. That's likely the reason the siblings were not very close. To act so rudely on my sister's big day, can't you see you're tarnishing your own reputation? The CEO said. Next to the supervisor, who had turned a deep shade of pale, the vice president seemed to have lost all color as well. It was the supervisor he had personally recruited who was now causing the scandal. He likely realized that he bore some responsibility for this blunder. It's a misunderstanding. I'm the victim here. He assaulted me. You shouldn't be blaming me, the supervisor exclaimed, his words becoming more and more erratic. The CEO, clearly infuriated, told him, "Go home and await disciplinary action." That voice sounded chillingly cold, as if it echoed from the depths of hell. And so, our modest revenge plan, by Catherine and me, came to an end. It was I who bridged the gap between the two who weren't on good terms. The moment the CEO returned to the country, Catherine and I went to report our marriage to him. I think I'll never forget the surprised look on his face at that time. I told the CEO, "Let's forget the grudges from our parents' time and build a new era together." He, who had always doted on me like a younger brother, probably never imagined I'd marry his half-sister, Catherine. "Jason, from now on, you're truly my brother. On behalf of our father, I ask you to take care of Catherine." The CEO deeply bowed, and Catherine hugged him, repeatedly saying thank you and I'm sorry. Finally able to share words she'd always kept inside, Catherine joyfully grabbed both my arm and the CEO's, smiling gleefully. A year passed since our wedding day. One day, Catherine approached me, clearly excited about something. It seemed like she was hiding something behind her back. "What are you hiding?" At my inquiry, Catherine unveiled a flyer with a playful ta-da. It was an advertisement for a nighttime botanical garden. "We're going again this year, right?" Catherine looked at me, eyes sparkling with anticipation. "Of course, and next year, and the year after. Let's make it our tradition," I replied. Catherine nodded, her face full of happiness.